Hey everyone, welcome back to the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I'm Dan Harris, joined by Mike Tagliere. You can find us on Twitter at DanHarris80 and at Mike Tagliere NFL. I will bring in tags in a second, but before I do, you're probably going to need to hit the waiver wire with all the injuries today. So make sure you check out Tags and Bobby's Week 8 waiver wire pickups video on Tuesday at 11 a.m., which you can find on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/fantasypros. Make sure to subscribe and check it out. Again, that's youtube.com/fantasypros. Tagged, how you doing?
Oh, man, I've had better days. Let's just say that. I mean, I think we've been spoiled with NFL over the last few weeks where things were going kind of like they were supposed to go. And then we had a day like today where things didn't. It's funny because today was the day where I'm standing up in a wedding really soon. And they had a rehearsal. They had the rehearsal today and the rehearsal dinner. And can you go? And I'm like, well, no, I obviously have to work. You know, the rehearsal was 11 o'clock this morning and the gathering was at 3 o'clock. So my wife went and, they were all asking where I was at, and she's like, well, he's working. And they were all like, yeah, oh, working. I'm like, believe me when I say, I would have much rather been at the bar today with you guys hanging out, drinking beer, than sitting watching football, what was on my TV today. It wasn't a pleasant experience. I'll just say that.
Yeah, it was a rough day. I don't know about you. I certainly made a few bad calls here today. Just things kind of, we talk about it. I feel like we start every show and it's either yeah, today's a good day. Things went like they were supposed to go. And then there are other days where things don't go exactly like they're supposed to go. And I think that today was probably the latter. But that leads us right into it. Get us started with at least your big winner of the day.
My big winner of the day, it's got to be Chase Edmonds. Chase Edmonds, taking advantage of the opportunity in front of him. A lot of people, that was part of the hate that was out there today on Twitter was that, what the hell is going on with David Johnson? I'm like, well, guys, David Johnson was active. We didn't know. Beat writers didn't know. Nobody knew that he was going to be active as an emergency running back only. DJ Foster was inactive for this game, so there was only 2 healthy running backs on the Cardinals' 53-man roster, which meant they kind of played it safe with David Johnson. And Cliff Kingsbury said on Friday, he said that if they played a game on Friday, that David Johnson would have been inactive. So that was somewhat telling. Maybe we should have looked more into that. But Chase Edmonds, if anything, with the way he played, he had a bigger game than David Johnson has all year. I think he earned himself a bigger role going forward, no matter what's going on with David Johnson's health. So I would say that Chase Edmonds is the biggest winner here.
Yeah, that was going to be my big question. First of all, people getting angry. Yeah, look, David Johnson was active. And the fact that there were only 2 running backs kind of suggested to me that they're probably not that worried about David Johnson, if anything, right? When you see that, you're sort of like, well, you've only got 2, so chances are you're not going in with one of them basically being kind of an injured guy. And they relied on Edmunds. Murray barely threw. I think he had 21 pass attempts or something. So they really relied on the running back, and they just ran Edmunds into the ground. Now, he has looked good, like you said, and that was going to be my next question. You think then that with the way Edmunds has looked, and again, today was great, but it hasn't just been today. He's looked pretty good whenever he's gotten any sort of work. You think he's earned himself a bigger sort of share of the pie, even if David Johnson is fully healthy. Is that fair?
I do, yes, but I also believe that Chase Edmonds is probably a sell high. He's had 3 consecutive weeks where he's been a fantasy performer, and there's some people that are going to buy more into this than anything, and I'm selling high. I think he's one of the better handcuffs, and he did improve his stock moving forward. He should be considered a top 40 running back, maybe top 35. But at the same time, if you find someone willing to pay you more than that, I think Chase Edmonds is actually a sell high.
And I think that that's fair to say considering their upcoming schedule, which is at New Orleans versus the 49ers, at the Bucs, and at the 49ers again, followed by a bye. So that's definitely something. But I do agree that I do think that he has earned himself more carries than he'd been seeing when Johnson was healthy. Let's switch to your biggest loser here, Tags. Who you got?
I mean, I could have said it was David Johnson, obviously, with the vice versa of that, but I'm going to go with Joe Mixon. The last 2 weeks it's been brutal, but today, 10 carries, 2 yards. I know he scored a touchdown. Joe Mixon just plays on a bad football team. They were down 3 offensive linemen this week, so I didn't expect too much out of him, but the fact that he's not being involved in the passing game, over the last 2 weeks, despite playing down in the majority of those games, he's had 3 targets. It's pretty terrible. He's moved down. He's outside my top 25 running backs for the rest of the season, so he's no longer a must start at all, and it's really sad to say, but it just continues to get worse.
Yeah, that was certainly going to be one of my big things when we got to that game because, look, one of the things I like to do is I have both of our rest of season rankings up in front of me all the time before you change them because I know that everything's going to be, moot by the time I get there. But you and I have in lockstep been moving Mixon down a couple of spots each week. And yeah, I agree. Especially, I kept holding out stupid hope, really, but because Mixon's very talented. So you look for guys like that, and to look for a reason to say, well, there's got to be something that's going to make him back. And I kept being like, well, maybe AJ Green, when he comes back, it'll open up. But AJ Green's not on the way back anyway, so none of that really matters. But yeah, I agree. It was just dreadful for the entire the Bengals team is just, other than the Falcons, perhaps, they're really kind of the big losers of the season so far. So yeah, I agree. Mixon, to me, he was 23rd coming in. He was 21 for you. He's outside your top 25. He is for me as well. I haven't settled on it, but I mean, I'm legitimately thinking like 30 at this point, because it's something where maybe you can start him as essentially as a flex or something like that, but really the idea of him being an RB2 I think is long gone. Let's move on here to my favorite segment, probably your least favorite segment, of What's Your Problem, man? Look, we all had a tough day here, so I'm going to take it easy here. So let's do somewhere, this is not going to be where I'm like, what is the matter with you, Tags? But let's go here. Matthew Stafford, Tags, 30 of 45 for 364 yards and 4 touchdowns against the Vikings, okay? He is actually our biggest difference in rest of season QB rankings. Second, actually, because you obviously have an irrational hate for Sam Darnold, but you had Stafford 22nd in your rest of season rankings. I am 13th coming in, Tag. So for today, anyway, explain yourself. What's your problem, man, with Matthew Stafford?
I mean, he's a streamer, and that's how I feel about him. Like, I think ideally the Lions don't want to throw the ball a whole lot. I think ideally they throw the ball in between 30 and 34 times per game, and it is what it is. And we saw with Stafford against Green Bay, 12 fantasy points. We saw it against Philadelphia, 12 fantasy points. Those are 2 decent matchups that he didn't really do so well in. And then you look at like the tougher matchups, and you're like today, there was no reason that anybody would have started Matthew Stafford today against Minnesota, but of course he has a good game. So he's in the streaming conversation. If you want to tell me that you would rather have, him over Jared Goff for the remainder of the season, I wouldn't fault you. I mean, I don't have it that way in my rankings, but I think once you get outside the maybe top 10 quarterbacks, I could interchange any of those guys, because Jameis Winston is who I have at 11, and he has off games. So it's not like I want to play him every single week. Kirk Cousins has been really good as of late. It doesn't mean I want to play him every week. Jared Goff has been terrible since the bye week for the Rams last year. So it's like, when you get into that conversation, I don't think any of them are must plays every single week, and I'm just going to stream the quarterback position if I don't have one of those guys like Deshaun Watson, Lamar Jackson, Russell Wilson, Patrick Mahomes, like those guys, you know what I mean? So it really just comes down to the matchup in front of me, and Matthew Stafford, unfortunately, he's been pretty unpredictable in terms of what you can expect out of on a weekly basis.
No, he has been. And again, this is why I'm sort of taking it easy on this one. I don't want to go too crazy, because I agree. Once you get outside, maybe the top 11, top 12, because I also have Winston at 11. That's about where my quote unquote comfort level ends. And that's kind of being loose with that word. It is a little bit interchangeable at this point, but let me just ask you something, because I'm looking at your rest of season rankings from before. Matthew Stafford or Baker Mayfield, rest of season?
I'll go with Baker, although it's probably not going to get too much better. Like I was looking at his schedule coming up. New England, Denver, Buffalo. It's like, whoo, that's a bad 3-game stretch. Like, those are 3 teams that legitimately almost take away your number 1 wide receiver. So, I mean, Baker, if I say over the next 3 weeks, I'm probably going to say Stafford.
Yeah, Stafford has a good schedule coming up, the Giants and at Oakland before he goes to Chicago. So, yeah, I agree. Look, I just, for me, once he gets to that level, he's a little more reliable than I'd find most of the other guys in there. Let's keep going with one more. And again, not a big one here. I'm nitpicking a little bit, but you had Tyler Lockett 15th in your rest of season half PPR rankings. I had him 9th. So I at least have him kind of as a comfortable wide receiver 1. You have him as a pretty decent wide receiver 2. They're still playing right now. So last I saw, he had 4 catches, 52 yards, and a touchdown. I'm just having a hard time seeing how he's not a wide receiver 1. He's always a threat for the red zone. He's the number 1 option for maybe the best quarterback in the league. I understand he doesn't see the crazy amount of targets most games that you want to see from a wide receiver 1, but I mean, normal target volume does not really apply. We've been waiting for that for Russell Wilson, right, forever, and it just doesn't really apply to this. So, are you moving Lockett into the wide receiver 1 conversation?
I still have him at 15, honestly. It's like I'm keeping him right there. I'm just too much of a realist. And it's like I tell people it's the same reason I'm better in cash games in DFS than I am tournaments, because I'm just like too logical to think outside the box sometimes. And when it comes to someone like Tyler Lockett, knowing that in 4 of 6 games coming into this week, he had seen 5 or less targets, like that's not sustainable fantasy production. Like you can't keep doing that. I know he scores touchdowns, and I know that Russell Wilson like completes like 90% of his passes. But I don't know. I just cannot continually like think that he's like a guy that you're playing him every week. Like, let's be clear about that, because at 15, like you're not going to have like 3 wide receivers who are ranked higher than him on a weekly basis. But I'm just like thinking about guys like T.Y. Hilton. You know, that's a guy that sees a lot of targets in his offense. He's been good. If you want him over Mike Evans, I guess I couldn't fault that. Adam Thielen now dealing with an injury, a hamstring injury. We don't know how long that's going to be out. But I would rather take someone like Julian Edelman than Tyler Lockett, just because it's like, at least I know Edelman's locked into like 8+ targets when he's on the field and healthy. They're coming from Brady, so it's still a good, elite quarterback. But it's like that tier. I would say that Devontae Adams is probably in that tier now with the injury and how long that's been going on. But that's the tier I think I put Lockett in. And so would I fault someone for saying that he's like a top 12 guy? No, not really. But it's about me being like hesitant just because of the fact that the targets are so low.
I get it. It's such nitpicking. I couldn't bring myself to go crazy with this one. And again, what I do with this segment, which I love, is I look for the biggest differences in our rest of season rankings, and I look for someone who had a good game. And then I try to sort of tear it in there. But, this was really as close as I can. I do have him 9th. As I said, that's probably where he's going to stay. I agree that it's sort of not the typical things that we look at to value somebody at this level. But in the end, it just doesn't really matter for me. I mean, I'm willing to sort of accept that there are anomalies in the way I need to analyze fantasy football. And this and Russell Wilson, the entire Seahawks, is one of them. I've been waiting for it to kind of come back down to earth for a while. I actually do have him behind Mike Evans, but, I have him over Odell. I had him over Thielen coming in. I have him slightly over Edelman.
Well, you know what's funny? Though, Dan? I think this is a good conversation, though, because like even going back to the preseason, Bobby and I were talking about like, because people would come on and say they like Tyler Lockett, and Bobby's like, no, this is a guy that's never seen more than like 80 targets. And I'm like, I actually agree with you in that, like in the fact that I don't see him as like a 120 target guy. I see him maxing out probably about 105, 110 maybe. But I said the reason that I could understand, and the reason I'm not going to be like too harsh on people that do expect a breakout season from him, is that he is tied to Russell Wilson, an elite quarterback. And if you're gonna predict high efficiency for a wide receiver, you at least want him to have like that efficient quarterback. And Russell Wilson's like the definition of that. So it was a conversation that I clearly remember from this offseason saying, even though I didn't like love Lockett, I think I had him around 22, 21 among my wide receivers. Like it was something that it was like, it's like a lesson learned, right? It's just that even if we can't project elite volume for somebody, knowing that he's tied to an elite quarterback, that does have to provide some value.
Yeah. And again, I was not particularly high on him coming into the season either, but I feel like I've learned my lesson now and I'm willing to kind of go with it. All right, let's get into the games here. But before we do, I do want to talk about one of the sponsors of today's show, FanDuel. This season, there are more ways to win than ever, because FanDuel has more ways to win cash prizes and once-in-a-lifetime experiences during every single game, every single week. And look, you probably had a tough day today. Maybe you had the whole David Johnson, I'm active but not playing because of my ankle injury thing, or Tags just mentioned Adam Thielen's hamstring injury. Will Fuller hurt his hamstring? You might be in some trouble in your season-long leagues. That is, of course, unless you play daily fantasy sports on FanDuel, because no matter how many season-long leagues you're in, there's really nothing better than picking a new team each week, trying to strategize around which players might be under-owned or represent good values. You lost a player to injury, who cares? You can pick a new team next week, and off you go. I know I'm going to be playing tomorrow because, unlike Tags, I don't think that all Jets players stink. I'm sure Jamison Crowder is going to find some soft spots in that terrific Pats defense with them trying to lock down Le'Veon Bell and Robbie Anderson. And I know that Julian Edelman, the lone quasi-healthy wide receiver for the Patriots, should have a big day. So both are going to be in my lineup. I play it every single week. It's easy. It's fun. It gives me a chance to really go with the players that I love that week, even when I don't have them in season-long leagues. And this year, there are more ways to win than ever, and you can win millions of dollars, literally. And now FanDuel is offering a great promotion to new users. You can get $20 in site credits when you deposit $20 or more. And it's actually even cooler this year because you'll get the extra $5 in site credits each week for 4 weeks. To get this great offer, just go to FanDuel.com/fantasypros or download the FanDuel app. That's FanDuel.com/fantasypros. All right, Tags, let's start with Thursday. Chiefs 30, Broncos 6. It's obviously all about the Patrick Mahomes injury here. Sounds like he's going to miss at least 3 weeks, maybe 3 to 5. There's a little conflicting reports. Chiefs have a bye in week 12, so this might be one where they play it a little extra safe. Tags, no real analysis here. Just give me a number. You have your rest of season rankings handy, I assume, because I always ask you about them. You had Tyreek Hill ranked 4th rest of season. Where is he now?
Yeah, I moved him down to number 9. I still do believe he's a top 10 wide receiver. I actually think he's a buy in fantasy football. Like, he was always like a boom or bust wide receiver anyways. Like, he's a guy that does a lot after the catch. He can kind of throw the ball up to you. Like, if you see some of the targets that he gets from Patrick Mahomes, like, there's nobody around Tyreek Hill because he's just that fast. He was a top 10 fantasy football wide receiver with Alex Smith a couple of years ago on just 105 targets. Matt Moore is a competent backup. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say that he's going to save the day. He's a competent backup. He has more touchdowns than interceptions thrown over the course of his career. He has spot started before. I know it's been a while since he has started a game, but under Andy Reid, we have to expect that his numbers would be a bit better than they would have been under Adam Gase, like Matt Moore. So I like Tyreek Hill as like a low-end wide receiver 1.
Man, I hate when you disregard my directions. I said no analysis, just give me a number, but that's fine. No, I'm just teasing you, man. Your analysis was great. Okay, now real here. No analysis. I just want your number. You had Sammy Watkins 28th. What's the number now?
Wide receiver 40.
Okay, yeah, so he takes a bigger dip. How about Travis Kelce? He was obviously first in your tight end rankings.
Tight end 2.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. That's enough, Tags. That's good. You explained it with Tyreek Hill. I like it. Let's move on quickly to the Chiefs running backs. LeSean McCoy, 12 carries, 64 yards, plus 2 catches for 12 yards. Damien Williams sees 9 carries, 7 yards, 2 catches for -1 yard. I assume now, because I believe that you, like me, had Williams ahead of McCoy coming into this week rest of season. Is Damien Williams droppable, Tags?
Droppable, maybe. I don't think so, just because like looking at the running back rankings when you get outside like the top like 36 to 38 running backs, it's kind of like a bunch of handcuffs, and Damien Williams would still be the top handcuff playing for Andy Reid, and I'm guessing now that Patrick Mahomes is going to miss some time that we're going to see the Chiefs run the ball a lot more. McCoy did move up. He is over Damien Williams. I have McCoy at RB26. I have Damien Williams at RB34. So, no, I don't think he's droppable, but you don't want to really necessarily start him right now.
On the Broncos, Phillip Lindsay, 11 for 36 on the ground, plus 1 catch for -4 yards. Royce Freeman, 10 for 35 on the ground with a touchdown, plus 4 catches yet again for 32 yards. First, I will say that this was incredibly annoying, just because this is not a game where either Phillip Lindsay or Royce Freeman should struggle to get going on the ground. That's just not the way football is supposed to work, but it did. Now, we've both been pretty consistent here with our rest of season rankings. Lindsay, a low-end RB 2.5 PPR. Freeman, more of a flex play. Did anything that happened Thursday night change your outlook on the running backs?
Not really, no. I think Phillip Lindsay is probably a buy low, because like whenever you see a running back struggle on national television, like that's when fantasy owners tend to overreact. And so because of that, I'm going to go out and trade for Phillip Lindsay, because like if you get up towards like the guys in his range, like those are all guys that are not going to perform on a weekly basis. We have to understand that he is involved in a 55-45 timeshare, but he had 3 like 15 plus point performances before that, like in the last 4 games. So it's like, it's one bad game. Don't overreact. The way that the Broncos defense is playing right now, they're going to be able to run the ball a lot. If you watch Joe Flacco drop back to pass, 40 times, you're going to see that doesn't really work. So we're going to see a lot more carries. Phillip Lindsay's fine. He's a low-end RB2, and it is what it is. He's not going to win you a fantasy championship, but he's not going to lose it. I don't think he's going to lose it for you either.
And again, still over Freeman rest of season, right?
Still over Freeman, yes.
Yeah, I agree. Again, this was just something. I mean, Freeman, I don't think he might have seen 1 carry inside the 5 coming into this game, but he's certainly a capable goal line back. He's bigger than Lindsay, sort of fits the prototypical sort of thing, and you knew just eventually he was going to score a touchdown. So I agree. Still, really, I don't think either one of them is going to move almost at all in my rest of season rankings from this game. Sounds like we're on the same page. Let's get into today. Packers 42, Raiders 24, a game that could have been much, much closer had the Raiders held it together in the red zone. Aaron Rodgers, 25 of 31 for 429 yards and 5 touchdowns, plus a rushing touchdown. Both Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams find the end zone, but Jones sees 16 touches, gaining 83 yards. Williams just 7 touches for 31 yards, so order restored a little bit in the Packers' backfield. Marquez Valdes-Scantling, though, goes for 133 yards and a score, only 2 catches, though. Jimmy Graham and Jake Kummerow also find the end zone. So, Tags, other than that Aaron Rodgers is awesome, and we probably should never doubt him again, are there any big takeaways here for the Packers? Unless you just want to talk about Aaron Rodgers, which you can go ahead.
No, we don't need to talk about Rodgers. But I do want to say that Aaron Jones, he was almost my biggest winner on the day. And I was saying that because he's a guy that we were worried about, like, this becoming a 50-50 timeshare again after the week that Jamal Williams had last week, but they went right back to him, like 12 carries to Jamal Williams' 3, and to know that Aaron Rodgers threw the ball a little bit off on a downfield target to Aaron Jones, and the adjustment that Aaron Jones made was like a wide receiver. Like it legitimately was, where he turned the last second and he went to the other shoulder. The ball wasn't really supposed to be there, but he kind of turned and then just snagged it. It was a thing of beauty. And I think Aaron Rodgers loves him as a receiver. They're using him down the field a little bit more. So yeah, Aaron Jones is a big winner here for me, and he stays inside my top 12 running backs for the rest of the season because of this performance. I was going to sway him quite a bit. I didn't know which way he was going to go, but I knew that this game was going to determine a lot, considering what the performance that Jamal Williams just had.
Yeah, there was definitely danger zone after last week. So it was really nice to see him have a big game. And again, make specifically not just the numbers, but make a really nice play there. They get KC next weekend, and despite what we saw this past week against the Broncos, they are certainly a soft run defense. As for the Raiders, again, really not a terrible game. Offensively, they could have put up a lot more points, and that's despite being down Tyrell Williams and others. Two big performances here. Josh Jacobs goes 21 for 124 on the ground, plus 3 catches, which is nice to see him getting more involved in the passing game of late. Only 10 yards, but still. And Darren Waller, of course, 8 targets, 7 catches, 126 yards, and 2 touchdowns. The second one a garbage time touchdown from Mike Lennon, but still, I'm really not sure there's much here. Jacobs is a reliable RB2. Waller, a pretty easy top 5 tight end at this point, right? Anything else?
Oh yeah, Waller's been in my top 5. He's one of those like set it and forget it tight ends. It was funny. My wife, she had a question on her lineup this week, and she said Darren, it was in her dynasty, and she said Waller, or I can't remember who it was, but it was like a fringe tight end one. I'm like, you always play Waller. You don't question that. Just put him in your lineup. And then she's like, of course, she's at the bar having those drinks for the wedding rehearsal, and she's like, Waller going off, and I'm like, yeah, that's why you play him every week. So it's kind of funny. It wasn't even a great matchup against the Packers. The Packers have been one of the better teams against tight ends since the start of last year under Mike Pettin. So great game for him. Derek Carr was off in this game. Like he missed. I know the final line was 22 of 28, but there were some throws that he just missed where you're just like, what happened there? Because it could have been a bigger play. Again, the final stats look good. The Packers' pass defense is starting to slowly wean back to the one that we used to attack in fantasy football after looking like dominant for the first 3 weeks. But I mean, it's a competent performance overall by the Raiders, just considering like the options they have out there. Keelan Doss, the number 1 receiver on their team. Trevor Davis, Marcel Aitman, like these guys are not starting wide receivers. Josh Jacobs did leave the game for a little bit, came back. So to see him have a big performance, like the confidence in him grows, and he's someone that continually moves up the rest of season rankings as we see him more involved in the passing game.
Yeah, the passing game is really what's doing it for me here. I mean, just those few extra targets that he gets each week. Yeah, he left early and everybody kind of freaked out, but he came back. If you were the host here, Tags, I do want to point it out because I get to basically direct this show, but if you were the host, you could have totally what's your problem manned me on Darren Waller because I had him 8th coming in for absolutely no reason. I agree. He's a rock solid top 5 tight end. He's great. And it's good to see him, after a couple of years of personal struggle, kind of get it all together this year. It's really nice. Before we move on, let me talk about Pristine Auction because they are amazing, guys. Legitimately. Look, I mostly buy sports memorabilia, I admit, and there is an incredible amount of that stuff on there. But for show and tell, my daughter this week brought in this Toy Story poster board. I think I mentioned it a couple of weeks ago. This thing that I got her from Pristine Auction. It has like the actual film prints of various scenes from the original movie. It's really cool. She completely freaked out about it. Her friends all love it. And the only reason I bought it was because I was looking for Jets memorabilia and saw it at an auction and won it for like $32 or something ridiculous because they have a ton of daily auctions, and you can get absolutely amazing deals at Pristine Auction. I mean, yesterday I saw a signed David Johnson jersey for $64 and a signed Tyreek Hill jersey for $67. Every item at Pristine Auction is guaranteed from only the most trusted sources. It is free to register. It is free to bid. You only pay money when you win an item. So go to pristineauction.com. That's PRISTINE auction.com and use our promo code FANTASYPROS in the registration field when you sign up. You'll get a free $5. And Pristine Auction has been a supporter of the show forever, including providing the items for our monthly contest. And that is my way of reminding you that they are providing the signed Julian Edelman helmet giveaway for this month's contest. You can get details over at fantasypros.com/contest, but spoiler alert, you can enter by leaving a review for the show in Apple Podcasts or Stitcher and sending a screenshot of that review to contest@fantasypros.com. All right, Tags, let's move on to our next game. Rams 37, Falcons 10. Now, I know as a Jets fan, historically, I'd kind of look for any other team that was in more disarray than mine. So if your team stinks, at least you can take solace that you are not an Atlanta Falcons fan. Matt Ryan limps off the field late. He was seen in a walking boot after the game. He's going for an MRI tomorrow. But right now, everyone thinks that it's not a serious injury. Devonta Freeman gets ejected after gaining just 25 yards, and Ito Smith was carted off with a head or neck injury. Let's start with the Falcons here, even though they're the loser. I mean, Julio Jones, 9 targets. He brings in 6 of them for 93 yards. Austin Hooper, 4 for 46, plus a late touchdown catch from Matt Schaub. Calvin Ridley, very quiet. Mohamed Sanu, very quiet. The team had been terrible, but the offense had always been good. So this is just kind of a bummer. I mean, what do you want to say here, Tags? I was going to say if Matt Ryan's hurt, what happens to the offense, but it does not sound right now like he's going to be hurt. So whatever you want to say here about the Falcons.
We watched a team that's going to have a new head coach next week. That's basically where I'm at with it. And if Matt Ryan's hurt, then it's all bad. It's all bad. Devonta Freeman got picked up by Aaron Donald. Like, he punched Aaron Donald. Like, what are you doing? And then, like, Donald, like, literally was holding him off of his feet. It was quite funny to watch that happen. But this team, it is one of the most frustrating things to watch because it's like there's so much talent on the offensive side of the ball, and Dan Quinn is supposed to be like the defensive-minded, head coach, but his defense has been terrible. I would say Jared Goff was even a disappointment in this game. Like, it should have been a bigger game for the Rams. This was the chance for the Rams offense to kind of like catapult themselves into the next week and get like a bit of a confidence builder. And it's not that it was a terrible game. I mean, they scored 37 points, but when you look at the game and how it transpired, I don't think it's what many people expected. This game was a letdown in a lot of ways, especially from a fantasy football standpoint. I mean, Julio Jones was shadowed by Jalen Ramsey, still got his 6 catches for 93 yards. Despite that, Calvin Ridley gets 4 catches for 30 yards. It's like, I mean, how do we not exploit the matchup here against Troy Hill? Like, an undrafted free agent against Calvin Ridley, one of the best route runners in the game. I don't understand what the Falcons are doing here. It's just frustrating as a whole. And if Matt Ryan's hurt, again, I don't see this team playing under Dan Quinn another game. I really don't. So that's my biggest takeaway from this game.
I think the only thing is we've been saying that now for like 2 weeks. You'd just be like, when is it going to happen? This one was really bad, though. I mean, this is just an absolutely terribly at home, a terrible, terrible loss. So I agree. At some point, it's just got to happen. And probably now. The biggest disappointment for me was Calvin Ridley because, again, it was a good matchup. This was where you want to do. And it's almost like they have it's like they're just going out there every week and just being like, we're just going to do whatever kind of we're doing without thinking about where can we actually make gains this week, and kind of make our mark. So this was really frustrating. Now, you mentioned Jared Goff. Fantasy-wise, he has a good game, right? He throws for 268 and 2 touchdowns, and he runs for a touchdown. So his fantasy owners, to the extent they started him, and they probably did because there are few matchups as good as this one, they're probably pretty happy. Let's talk about Todd Gurley for a second because he does find the end zone through the air, but he gains just 54 yards total. I thought about maybe putting Gurley in the What's Your Problem segment because you had him 13th in your rest of season half PPR rankings. I mean, today's game, he scores a touchdown, but you can't feel as good about him as you did coming in, do you?
I kind of feel the same, honestly. It's more about like the team struggling as an offense. Like, and who am I putting him over? Like, Kerryon Johnson got hurt. Marlon Mack is game script dependent. Melvin Gordon hasn't looked the same. That Chargers offense just hasn't looked the same recently. Derrick Henry, game script dependent. Josh Jacobs plays for a bad team. So it's kind of like process of elimination of the guys that I'm putting Todd Gurley over. So that's basically why he's where he is in the rankings. It's not that I feel like totally great starting Todd Gurley as an RB1 or anything like that. But it's more about like this offense, like thinking they could turn it around. But the part that I don't feel so bad about is Darrell Henderson. So many people were talking him up and saying, oh, he's a guy that's going to steal this job, and 11 carries for 31 yards. Nobody's getting it done behind this offensive line. Jared Goff is not forcing anybody to remain honest. He just hasn't played very well. And I'm concerned about this whole offense, if I'm being completely honest. Like, if you're able to sell Brandin Cooks, or I wouldn't sell Cooper Kupp just because like he's a guy that's going to get targets no matter what, and that's like the safety blanket for Jared Goff. But Robert Woods, Brandin Cooks, I'd be willing to sell for 75 cents in the dollar after this game.
Yeah, and I think that's actually my point with Gurley is, it's the offense, Tags. I mean, the offense is not nearly as good, and he's not a guy who's going to see 25 touches in a game anyway. He's going to have to get it done with 18 carries is fine, 19 touches overall is fine, but yeah, the offensive line is garbage right now. Not only did they take a dip coming into the year, but they're dealing with injuries coming in. It's not as if the schedule is super soft. They get the Bengals next week, that's great. Then they have Pittsburgh and Chicago and Baltimore, so it's not as if they're going good. So for me, yeah, I would take Jacobs over a guy like Gurley just because I don't necessarily trust that he's going to be able to get it done with this offense. I'm highly concerned about everyone. So I agree. I mean, if you can still get people, and I think there are still people who are willing to look at Cooks and just sort of write this off and be like, well, with the Rams receivers, it comes and goes, right? It ebbs and flows, and there are going to be huge games. I'm not sure how many huge games there are going to be. So if you can get people to buy them at, 75 cents, fine, maybe more like 80, 85 cents, something like that, then I'd be more than willing to make that move. But even if it's 75 cents, I think I agree. I do not see this as coming anywhere close to what they were last year. Let's move on to the most exciting game of the day, 49ers 9, Redskins 0. This game was played in a monsoon, so I'm not kidding. I legitimately think that we can throw the entire thing out and not talk about it all, but for the sake of being complete, I'm going to list the stats, and then anything you want to talk about, you can, but we can say monsoon, move on. But here are basically what you missed if you did not watch this game, and you should be a happier person for that. For the 49ers, Matt Breida had 8 carries for 35 yards. He did leave with what was deemed an eye injury, so hopefully it's not serious. Tevin Coleman does get 20 carries, but just 62 yards. Jimmy Garoppolo throws for 151 yards. Kendrick Bourne leads the way for the 49ers with 3 catches for 69 yards. George Kittle held to just 3 catches for 38 yards, and Dante Pettis was held without a catch. For the Redskins, Case Keenum throws for 77 yards. Adrian Peterson ran for 81 yards. Trey Quinn led the way with 30 yards receiving, and Terry McLaurin had 1 catch for 11 yards. Tags, don't force it. We're always pressed for time, but given the weather, is there anything you think that we can take away at all from this game?
Absolutely not. There's nothing. And that, I think it's good that we mentioned the game, obviously, but so many people on Twitter asked what happened. Oh, Dante Pettis breakout game. And I'm like, Did you see the game?
Did you watch that game?
Legitimately, they're sliding around in the mud. It was one of the ugliest games that you could possibly watch. So, when you see Adrian Peterson get 81 yards against the 49ers, you know that something's wrong. But there was one receiver in this game that had more than 40 yards. So it kind of explains everything. The 9-0 score is just, it is what it is. And there's nothing to take away from this game. Nothing.
And again, that receiver was Kendrick Bourne. So, you really don't want to get too excited about it. And I apologize to everyone who took my advice and took the 49ers laying 9.5 to the Redskins. I didn't know it was going to be a monsoon. Okay. It's my own fault. I'll check the weather better next time. Let's move on to Colts 30, Texans 23. Tags, are we undervaluing Jacoby Brissett here? Can he move to a little bit of the circle of trust? 26 of 39 for 326 yards and 4 touchdowns. He's got multiple touchdowns now in every game but one. He's got 3 or more touchdowns in 3 of his 6 games. He's not exciting, but we're talking about guys like Jared Goff, who we don't like, and Phillip Rivers, who really does very little. I think he might be a top 12 guy at this point.
Yeah, he now has 27 touchdowns and 10 interceptions over his career. That's a 2.7 to 1 ratio is really friggin' good. So maybe Jacoby Brissett is just better than we thought he was going to be. I liked Brissett this week. He was one of the good calls this week, I guess. Where I thought he was actually cash game viable. We talked about him on the DFS show. I think I had him ranked as a top 15 quarterback. We saw this offense, this Frank Reich-led offense. It was with Andrew Luck last year, but he crushed them both in both games last year. So obviously whatever they're doing in the scheme works against Houston, who is dealing with some injured cornerbacks. They were missing one of their starting cornerbacks. But I think the biggest disappointment here, Brissett, he was the QB 12 going into their bye, so he was already performing. So
that's what I mean. I feel like you and I are both. I'm not calling you out. I think we're both kind of missing the boat a little bit here.
I have a QB 16 the rest of the season, so it's I'm coming around that he's definitely a streamer that I'll consider more often than not. But I'm just waiting for the run game to pick up, and it's they're going to steal some of that production that he's been getting because Marlon Mack hasn't really done anything. And this was a game where it's they led throughout the majority of it, and Marlon Mack, 18 carries, 44 yards, no touchdowns. I'm just waiting for it to kind of flip, and it just hasn't. So, I guess ride Brissett as long as you can.
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to flip either. They've got Denver and Pittsburgh coming up. So, yeah, I mean, I like Brissett. I looked at him. I looked at sort of where I had him, and I said, this is a mistake. I need to correct this. T.Y. Hilton, 6 catches for 74 yards and a score. Eric Ebron, 4 for 70, and a really nice catch for a touchdown. But Zach Pascal, 7 targets, 6 catches, 106 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Is there anything to get excited about here with him?
Kind of. I mean, Paris Campbell was out again, but it's really tough. And this is like something I look at every single week, and I look at the snap counts between these receivers, and I'm waiting for one to step out. And it's like Deion Kane was getting a lot of the snaps, Pascal was getting snaps, Chester Rogers was getting snaps, and I'm like, I want one of them to step up. And I felt like it was Pascal because he was a guy when he's on the field, he's getting targeted, and he was like close to Deion Kane in terms of what the snaps they're playing. So in a matchup like this where I did like Brissett, I wanted to find someone outside of T.Y. Hilton, and Pascal was that guy. I don't want to sit here and say that I felt like he was a must play, but I mean, 7 targets. This is, I think, the first time that a Colts receiver, when T.Y. Hilton was in the lineup, saw more than 6 targets. So I don't want to get like too crazy about him. But it's like with bye weeks here, if you find a matchup where Indianapolis is going to be throwing the ball a lot, as you mentioned, the upcoming schedule against Pittsburgh and you said Denver, those aren't great matchups. So no, Zach Pascal is not somebody I'm going to run to the waiver wire to grab.
All right, let's move to the Texans here. Will Fuller injures his hamstring early here. Not sure of the severity yet, but they obviously declared him out pretty early. Deshaun Watson does throw for 308 yards, but just 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. The running game was entirely bottled up. Carlos Hyde, 12 for 35. Duke Johnson, 7 for 34. DeAndre Hopkins finally gets going. 12 targets, 9 catches, 106 yards in the score. But let's talk about Kenny Stills briefly. Let's assume that Will Fuller is out for a bit, which I think is fair. What happens to Kenny Stills in your rankings? He had 5 targets, 4 catches, 105 yards. Oddly enough, we both had him at exactly 73rd in our rest of season half PPR rankings. But let's assume Will Fuller's out for the next 4 weeks or something like that. What do you do with Kenny Stills? How do you think you'll be ranking him weekly?
I moved him up to wide receiver 66. I don't feel like he's like a must play by any means. He's one of those guys that just relies on the big play a little bit too much. This was a game where Houston fell behind. They threw the ball a little bit more. He's going to step into that Will Fuller role because QT is going to kind of play the slot role that he's been doing. And I have them right next to each other. I just don't know if you're going to be able to split it, like in terms of like who you feel confident starting every single week between those two players. DeAndre Hopkins getting 12 targets is nice, but I mean, are we going to ever confidently start Kenny Stills? I don't think the answer is yes to that. Would you like? What's your take on this? Because this is one of those things where I don't feel great about either way. I don't feel confident in saying, oh, he's never going to be fantasy relevant, but I also don't want to sit here and say that he's a guy that you should snag off waiver wires and start him. They're playing. I'm looking at the matchup. They're playing Oakland next week, so it is a good matchup. The one that potentially you could target. I don't know if I'm going to have him ranked as higher than like maybe wide receiver 45, 50 range.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't think you're really wrong with anything you're saying. My guess is if Fuller is out, I'll probably have him a little higher than that just because, look, he's consistently produced when he's been in there so far this year. And he seems to, whether it's a connection with Watson or whether Watson trusts him or whatever it is, but he's not somebody who I think is, okay, this is a guy who's going to save you as a wide receiver, even if Fuller's out for the rest of the season. But I do think he's a guy who you can probably be like more of a borderline wide receiver 3 would be my guess, depending on the matchup, especially next week, as you mentioned, against Oakland. But he's not a guy who I'm going to, break all my fab on or anything like that. In the end, though, I do think that I have a little more optimism with what he would be like, at least for next week. So you'll want to monitor Will Fuller. I'm sure you and Bobby will talk about him on the waiver wire show. But for now, Fuller, who's injury prone in his career, with the hamstring injury, they're always tricky. So you'll want to monitor that, as you will with Adam Thielen, which takes us to our next game. Vikings 42, Lions 30. Thielen does catch the early touchdown pass, but he injures his hamstring and he is ruled out for the rest of the game. The Vikings, I believe, have a Thursday game against the Redskins.
Kirk Cousins' revenge game.
Oh, baby, he's going to go crazy. I mean, he is on quite a roll right now. And kudos to you, by the way. I mean, you've always been consistent, not like you love him or anything, but you've been consistently higher on him than I thought was, justifiable, frankly, in your rest of season rankings. So you've kind of always had a little bit more of an eye towards him in that way. But anyway, Thielen has expressed optimism that he's going to be able to play on Thursday. I would be shocked. When you injure your hamstring and you're out for the rest of the game, it sounds really hard to come back in 4 days. Also in this game, Kerryon Johnson, as you mentioned, 5 carries for 23 yards before being removed with a knee injury. So we'll get to that in a second, but let's start with the Vikings here. I did feel, although your rest of season rankings on Cousins was certainly more optimistic than mine, you did poo-poo the Vikings opening up the passing game a little bit after we talked about it the last few weeks. And I get that Cousins still threw only 34 times. That's not a crazy amount, but 337 yards and 4 touchdowns. Stephon Diggs being the only game in town, has 8 targets, 7 catches, 142 yards. A lot of that on a very late, well-designed 66-yard catch late in the game. Kyle Rudolph, Bissy Johnson also finds the end zone. And meanwhile, Dalvin Cook, 25 for 142 on the ground with 2 touchdowns. He is very good at football. Any takeaways here? I mean, you said sell high on Stephon Diggs this week on the podcast. I mean, of course, if Thielen is injured, that changes things. But if he's not, do you still feel like sell high here on Diggs?
I mean, if there's 34 pass attempts every week, I feel confident saying that Diggs is going to be a little bit up and down in his production. But if Thielen's going to miss a couple weeks, then no. Then Diggs is like the only show in town. Even if he's thrown the ball 30 times, it could be like a Terry McLaurin situation where it's like we have an elite route runner tied to a quarterback that maybe not throwing a whole bunch of passes, but he's going to be targeting him, 8 times per game. The concern with Diggs is that he had been targeted like 4 times in multiple games, and that's like never a good thing when you're looking for wide receiver 2, wide receiver 1 production out of a player. I had him as like a high-end wide receiver 3 in my rest of season rankings coming into this game, and he's moved up for sure because I do anticipate Adam Thielen to miss some time. Hamstring injuries are ones that could be re-aggravated if they try and push and come back too early. So yeah, Diggs is no longer a sell of mine, and I think part of the reason he had a bigger game here is because Thielen had to exit it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And look, you've been higher on Stephon, as much as I said you said to sell high on Stephon Diggs, you've been higher on Stephon Diggs than I have been rest of season all year. I mean, even coming into this game. So I certainly don't mean to act like you had anything wrong, but I agree. I mean, I own Diggs a lot because I love Diggs as a player. I think he is one of the most talented wide receivers in the game, basically. But this is not a scenario that he's going to be able to give you consistent production unless Thielen is out. If he is, it does change the equation. But I agree, it's nice to see him, do good work, especially, again, he would have had kind of a mediocre game if not for that very late touchdown where the Lions were playing the run and he beat them deep. Darius Slay did leave this game as well, which opened things up a little bit more. But going to the Lions, let's talk 2 different things. First, the receivers. Marvin Jones, 4 touchdown catches, 93 yards. I don't think anybody really saw that coming. Danny Amendola, 11 targets, 8 catches, 105 yards. Kenny Golladay, just 2 targets for a catch, 21 yards. Did he leave the game with an injury? Did I miss that, or was he just not at all targeted?
Nope, he just was not targeted. It was really odd, and that's where it's like, process over results. I've always stood by that, and it was frustrating today to watch Marvin Jones, a guy that, again, had been like lightly targeted. There was just one game, I think just one game with more than 5 targets this year. He was like 100% behind Kenny Golladay. Coming into this year, I was actually of the mindset that these guys would be closer together in terms of like a 1A, 1B situation where Golladay took a slight step forward, Jones took a slight step back, but Golladay coming into this game had seen at least 7 targets in every game, whereas Jones was the one that was struggling to get those targets. So naturally, Marvin Jones is going to have 4 touchdowns against the Vikings. I tweeted it out earlier today that Marvin Jones, so Xavier Rhodes, now it's 7 touchdowns. He's allowed 7 touchdowns in the last 3 seasons. 4 of them have gone to Marvin Jones.
So I think it was 2 years ago whenever they played on Thanksgiving, and I wrote the start-sit article where all I did was compare my rankings to the expert consensus rankings and start based on that. And Jones was the lead on the sit because I had him lower. You have tags. I have saved them. I got so many nasty, angry emails, which I've saved because I just want, hopefully one day, somebody to hit me up on Twitter and ask me for advice so I can have their names and I can always know burned into my brain, because I remember that because it ruined my Thanksgiving. But yeah, I don't know why it is, man, but he just seems to tear up Xavier Rhodes. But, if you're one of those guys who emailed me like 3 years ago, don't worry, I know who you are. All right, let's briefly talk about the running game here. Look, the Lions cut C.J. Anderson earlier in the season. What happens right now if Kerryon Johnson needs to miss time? I mean, J.D. McKissick, 5 carries for 29 yards, plus 31 through the air. Ty Johnson, 10 for 29 on the ground, plus 28 yards through the air. I mean, what do fantasy owners do here if Kerryon Johnson misses time? I
would imagine they're probably going to bring back C.J. Anderson. I mean, that's just my guess. Otherwise, it's going to be a messy timeshare. McKissick is going to be somewhat of the Theo Riddick of the offense, where Ty Johnson would be tied to most of the early down work, get a little bit work on the passing downs. It's really just going to be matchup dependent on if you believe that the Lions are going to be playing out front or they're going to be playing from behind. But if C.J. Anderson comes back, he's going to kind of take that role from Ty Johnson, and I still think we're going to see McKissick involved in the passing game in that like Theo Riddick type role.
Okay, cool. Let's move on to the next game here. Jaguars 27, Bengals 17. I mean, Leonard Fournette has the game that kind of we all expected, except for the usual lack of touchdown. 29 for 131 on the ground, plus 14 through the air. Gardner Minshew throws for 255 yards and a touchdown to D.D. Westbrook, who goes for 6 catches, 103 yards with the score. And DJ Chark, a little disappointed here. 4 targets, 3 catches, 53 yards. Anything that you want to talk about here from the Jaguar side of the ball?
Has the Minshew magic died?
Yeah, dude, it died like 2 weeks ago. It's no longer around. I mean, they won. That's great, and he still looks fantastic. But from a personal level, just with the stash and everything. But in terms of the magic, yeah, dude, that's done. That is gone. That's gone.
Yeah, the Bengals were without their 2 starting cornerbacks today. William Jackson and Drake Kirkpatrick were both out. So I figured my concern with Minshew this week, the only reason that I didn't rank him higher was that I was like, oh, Leonard Fournette's going to kill the Bengals on the ground. And we're probably going to see like a 20 to 25 pass attempt. If you were to tell me that Gardner Minshew was going to throw the ball 32 times against the Bengals today, I would have been like, I'm ranking him as a top 10 quarterback. And obviously that wouldn't have worked out. So fortunately that didn't happen. But is it dying? This is a game that I'm going to be honest, I did not watch very much of this game. Again, there's only so many games that I could have on the TVs, and this was not one of them. So I'll be going back to watch this game. But Minshew completing less than 50% of his passes against this team is not very good.
Yeah, you didn't miss much, Tags. It just wasn't a crisp game all around. And really, it wasn't a blowout at all. I mean, it was close until late when the Jaguars kind of took control, and then they got a defensive score and everything. So, yeah, he's not playing nearly as well. I mean, Chark is still a guy who you can start most weeks. But overall, certainly the Minshew magic has gone. We talked about Joe Mixon already on the Bengals side of the ball, but, on the passing side, Tyler Boyd sees 14 targets, just 5 catches for 55 yards, and he loses a fumble. But Alex Erickson, 14 targets, 8 catches for 137 yards. Look, I don't want to brag, Tags, but you didn't even have him ranked rest of season, and I had him 101st, so foo on you. Look, I mean, is there anything here with AJ Green not close to returning, or is this just, wow, crazy game, move on?
I mean, it puts him back on the radar. I know he'd been targeted the other week too, but it was very hesitant of him. I wouldn't have, obviously nobody started him this week, but it's something you have to consider, because like when you see Auden Tate get 6 targets, Erickson 14, even if they flip-flop, Erickson getting 6 targets, that's worth something in fantasy football. So it's definitely worth paying attention. And they say that AJ Green is, I find it very funny that they announced that AJ Green is not going to be available to them until after the trade deadline, which is like, okay, you guys said you're not trading him. They said he's absolutely not available in a trade, but why? Like you see the Bengals team on the field, right? Like the GM sees that, and I understand wanting to keep a legend, a guy that is one of the best Bengals of all time, wanting to keep him in a Bengals. I get that. But at the same time, if you have a chance to better your franchise in the next 10 years because of you were able to trade him for, a high draft pick, you do that. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm all about keeping players where they started, but if you can move AJ Green for something that helps you in the future, you should do it. So I think there's still something that could be done with a team, maybe a team like the 49ers make a move for someone like AJ Green. That would make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, don't write that off, man. Every team says they're not coming out and trading players. It's possible that they won't. Also, frankly, if you're a member of the Bengals front office and you're listening to this podcast, don't give up. You've got plenty. You could do it. I mean, think crazier things. I'm just kidding. Get rid of everybody on that team. Start with Joe Mixon. Put him on a coaching staff that knows how to utilize him, please, for the love of everything good and decent. Cardinals 27, Giants 21. We already talked about the Chase Edmonds game. That's really all there was. Kyler Murray threw just 21 pass attempts, 104 yards. Pharoh Cooper is the leading receiver with 29 yards. Let's briefly, let's talk about Larry Fitzgerald. I mean, Fitzgerald, right? I mean, this is basically, he hasn't topped 69 yards since week 2. I mean, are you getting worried about this or what?
I absolutely am. And not just that, like he's been struggling. He hasn't topped, I think, 70 yards going back to that time either. So it's like, if he's not doing that, like the safety was supposed to be there this week against the Giants. There was no reason Fitzgerald, like I would have literally bet money on him to finish with at least 5 catches in that game. Like there would have been no reason, because the Giants have struggled against the slot receivers all year long. But knowing that Christian Kirk is going to be coming back, and that the fact that this offense isn't throwing the ball as much as maybe they open the season, I think Fitzgerald's going to start losing some of those targets. His floor is going to continue to get lower once Christian Kirk comes back. So I am worried about him. He was actually almost my biggest loser for the day.
Yeah, so let me ask you. I mean, we both had him right at the same spot. You had him 23rd, I had him 24th, rest of season, half PPR. Where is he now?
I moved him down to wide receiver 29, I believe.
Yep, that's about right for me. I mean, I'm ballparking it right now, but I see it as 30, which would basically give us a corresponding move. I agree. I'm concerned for the reasons that you say. On the other side of the ball, Saquon Barkley returns here for the Giants. I wouldn't say he looks 100%, but 18 for 72 on the ground, plus a score, plus another 3 catches, only 8 yards. Through the air, Golden Tate with a solid game, 11 targets, 6 catches for 80 yards. Huge disappointment for Evan Engram against what had been the best matchup for tight ends. Almost 5 targets, 1 catch. I believe 7 yards. I don't know about my notes there. Takeaways here for the Giants.
That Saquon Barkley's not going to get as many targets with Daniel Jones as he did with Eli Manning. There was a few times while watching that game that I was like, he's open in the flat. And I was like, wait, it was almost like I've seen the blue, quarterback standing there for so long that I anticipate it's Eli Manning just checking the ball down to Saquon Barkley. Multiple times I saw this happen and I was like, oh, he didn't check down. I'm like, oh, it's Daniel Jones. So Barkley's receiving floor isn't as high as it used to be with Eli Manning, it seems. With Golden Tate, Evan Engram, Sterling Shepard, these guys are all intermediate receivers, kind of in that short area of the field where they don't really go down the field very often. So he's going to be competing with those guys quite often. The biggest disappointment for me was Evan Engram. 5 targets, 1 catch for 6 yards. Now, Rhett Ellison scores a touchdown a week after I needed him for a bet against the Cardinals, though. But if people out there are panicking about Evan Engram because if they own him, they didn't have him last week, and then you have this game where it's he disappointed against the Cardinals of all teams, maybe they're willing to sell low. He's one of those tight ends that continually gets targeted. I would be actively trying to get him in your fantasy league. If you've been streaming the tight end position, give it up and go get Evan Engram.
So the only thing I'll say about that is I agree with that. I think Engram is a guy who you're going to, stick in your lineup every day. But would you at least agree that he's basically the last of those guys? I mean, to me, it's Kelsey, Kittle, Ertz, Hooper. I mean, for me, Andrews, Waller, and Henry, and that Engram is kind of the last guy hanging up the rear.
Yep, I have it. Kittle, Kelsey, Ertz, Waller, Hooper, Andrews, Henry, Engram.
And that's the last one, right? That after that, it's streaming.
And if you wanted to do Engram over Henry, I could see that too. So it's right in that 7-8 territory for him.
That's fine. Yep, that's what I mean. I mean, he is, though, above that line for me, but he is the last guy for me above that line. Bills 31, Dolphins 21. Dolphins cover, so that's nice. Disappointing day for the Bills ground game here. Frank Gore just 11 for 55 on the ground. Devin Singletary 7 for 26. Gore just didn't get the volume, I think, that a lot of us expected. Josh Allen throws for 202 yards, 2 touchdowns. He rushes for 32 yards, plus he converts a 2-point conversion with his legs. John Brown, 5 for 83 with the touchdown. Anything here from the Bills and the softest matchup there could be?
Yeah, the Dolphins almost won the game. That was what happened here, Bills? It's one of those games where it's just maybe it was just kind of glance it over. I remember the Bears last year against the Dolphins. They lost the game to them, and where it was everybody kind of it was oh, it's a win, it's in the bag. The Bills were coming off a bye. You figured they would have been prepared, but either way, they walk out with the win. Ryan Fitzpatrick puts together a revenge game against his old team, which, by the way, I think Ryan Fitzpatrick has a revenge game every other week.
I mean, it's unfair. You can't play for every team because then you get a revenge game against every team. It's just unstoppable narrative.
The biggest thing here is that Mark Walton is a guy that you should grab off waiver wires if he's available. I say that because we are anticipating Kenyon Drake to get traded at the trade deadline. That maybe the Lions go and get Kenyon Drake. I don't know what the Dolphins are looking for in a trade. I can't imagine it's a high asking price with running backs nowadays. So maybe they go out and get Kenyon Drake if Kerryon Johnson's going to miss time with that knee injury. But Mark Walton is a guy that received 15 touches today. That's with Kenyon Drake on the team. I knew that they were going to try and protect Drake. If they're going to trade him, they need him to be healthy. So Mark Walton is clearly the running back that they're going to trust with this job moving forward. So if you're going to go through bye weeks and need someone to fill in lineup spots, Mark Walton is someone I would absolutely go and grab.
Yeah, 14 carries for 66 yards. Of course, Kalen Ballage, again, vultures the touchdown. But let's just very, very quickly. Preston Williams, 8 targets, 6 catches, 82 yards. He did lose a fumble. But Devontae Parker, 5 for 55 and a touchdown. That's his 3rd straight game with the touchdown here, Tags. Are you caring at all about the Dolphins wide receivers that you can plug them in during the bye weeks or what?
Yeah, I mean, as long as Ryan Fitzpatrick's the starter.
He's been named the starter, just to be clear, for next week already.
He has. Well, that's a good thing because, that's kind of how it should be. It's been pretty ugly with Josh Rosen, where it's I don't think you can trust anybody. But Ryan Fitzpatrick he's the D-gaffer, man. He's the guy that straight up does not care. He's willing to throw it into one-on-one coverage, and Devontae Parker's been winning some of those battles. So in a matchup like this, I didn't think that Parker or Preston Williams was going to have much fantasy reliability. So to see them walk out of this game with production, It's not bad. And then but you go through and you look at the upcoming schedule. You're like, well, the Pittsburgh Steelers next week, they've been really good. Like ever since the start of the year, they had some troubles. They've kind of straightened it out. That defense has looked a lot better.
Yeah, with once they got Minkah Fitzpatrick, I mean, I don't know if it's correlation or causation, but they've looked a lot better.
They have. And then it's like the Jets and the Colts after that, and then you get Buffalo again. The schedule is pretty good heading into the fantasy playoffs. So, I mean, I definitely believe that they should both be rostered in 12-man leagues. I don't know if you have to trust them. It's more like, okay, well, I have this guy in a bye week. I could plug him in. But they're not guys I want to rely on every single week, even though Preston Williams is getting tons of targets.
Yeah, let's move on to the late games here. Titans 23, Chargers 20. This was still going on when we started recording. I believe, I'm not sure if Melvin Gordon fumbled or if he just came up short or whatever happened, but the Chargers lose another heartbreaker. Look, the Titans offense, I get that the Chargers defense is not the scary unit right now that we thought it was going to be, and they sustained more injuries, I believe, during this game. But Ryan Tannehill, 23 of 29 for 312 yards. 2 touchdowns. He does throw a pick. Derrick Henry, his usual solid, 22 for 90 on the ground with a touchdown. But, I mean, can we at all get remotely excited about any of the wide receivers here? Corey Davis, 7 targets, 6 catches, 80 yards, and a touchdown. A.J. Brown, 8 targets, 6 catches, 64 yards. Now, I will mention, by the way, that Jonnu Smith had a pretty nice game, 3 for 64. I believe Delaney Walker got injured here early on in the game, so just pointing that out. But again, Corey Davis, who everybody's kind of been waiting for years, or A.J. Brown, can you get at all excited about this with Tannehill under center?
Yes. Yes, you can. Because it's a very top-heavy offense. Like, we're not going to see many 4 wide receiver sets. We don't have to worry about that. Derrick Henry's not targeted a whole lot in the passing game. Deion Lewis is non-existent. So, yeah, I think you can. And Ryan Tannehill looked a lot better than Marcus Mariota has. Davis had, he catches 6 of 7 targets, 80 yards and touchdown in a tough matchup against LA, whereas Casey Hayward in coverage a lot of the time, even A.J. Brown catching 6 of 8 targets. Ryan Tannehill looked better. I was able to watch a lot of this game, and Tannehill has this job. They're not going back to Marcus Mariota after this one. Tennessee gets the win over the Chargers. That's obviously big, and Tannehill did play well. So, yeah, I am excited about Corey Davis, and playing against Tampa Bay next week, they're not going to be able to run the ball very well, so I anticipate Corey Davis being ranked as a top 40 wide receiver, A.J. Brown maybe being a top 50 wide receiver, and I mean, there's only 2 teams on bye this coming week, so you might not need someone, but if Corey Davis has been dropped in your format, which he hasn't a lot, I would highly recommend going to pick him up.
Yeah, it's about as soft a matchup as you can get for a wide receiver when you go up against the Bucs. On the other side of the ball, I mean, it's not all bad. Rivers does wind up throwing for 329 yards and 2 touchdowns, but Melvin Gordon does lose a fumble. He 16 carries for only 32 yards. Now, he does catch a touchdown, but hardly a great day for him. Austin Eckler, 118 yards receiving, 7 catches, and the touchdown gets back to it. Hunter Henry, though, I mean, he is, I don't think we needed more proof that he was rock solid and back, but 8 targets, 6 catches for 97 yards. Keenan Allen, 11 targets tags. I mean, that's a great number. That's sort of what you want to see, but 4 catches, 61 yards. I mean, where are you on Keenan Allen at this point? Because I'm getting a lot of people. I write the Panic Meter article. He's going to be on it this week per, listener requests over here. So where are you right now on Keenan Allen?
I'm buying him. We talked about some wide receivers, like guys like Mike Evans. These guys aren't producing weekly, but people still rank them as a top 10, top 12 wide receiver. Keenan Allen, Phillip Rivers he just got over a slump. I know he bounced back in this game a bit with, over 300 yards and a couple touchdowns. It's good to see Keenan Allen get 11 targets. They're just not on the same page, but for whatever reason, there was a couple times in this game where I saw Keenan Allen get open and he was just underthrown or overthrown. So I'm not worried about Keenan Allen. He's still one of the top route runners in the game. He still gets open. Phillip Rivers will find him. And it's when that starts happening, people aren't going to think that it's a performance out of nowhere. They're going to know, be like, oh, we've seen Keenan Allen do this before, and that's when it's going to be impossible to buy him. But now coming off these lowly performances, you might be able to get him for middling wide receiver 2 prices, low end wide receiver 2 prices. And if you could do that, I'm buying Keenan Allen because I still have him ranked as a top 10 rest of season receiver.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, again, we've seen this enough. We've seen too much of Keenan Allen to really be worried about this so long as he's still getting the targets. And I agree, Rivers really drastically underthrew him on a couple of spots where he could have had big plays. So I agree. I am not personally worried at all. And I would certainly, if you can get him for wide receiver 2 prices, you definitely do that. Ravens 30, Seahawks 16, a very Ravens-y offensive game over here. Lamar Jackson completes just 9 passes for 143 yards. He runs, though, 14 times, 116 yards, and a touchdown. Nobody else really does anything. Mark Andrews drops like 5 passes or something. I was like, wait, what is happening right now? He gets 8 targets, 2 catches for just 39 yards. But again, the leading receiver, Miles Boykin, 2 catches for 55 yards. Mark Ingram doesn't really get it done on the ground, 12 for 46. So anything here from the Ravens side of the ball, or was this just kind of a grind it out? This is how they're going to win this game.
We've been seeing this happen. Like Lamar Jackson has been slowly like just coming back to the Lamar Jackson that he was towards the end of last year. And it kind of stinks as a passer, but at the same time, he's starting to run the ball again. And it's like this is a guy that legitimately set the record for rushing attempts last year for a quarterback. And despite not even, starting until it was like, week 9, week 10. So Lamar Jackson, the floor is just too high to pass up. I mean, you're getting an RB1, and you're getting a quarterback that's going to throw maybe 20 to 25 passes per game. And if he connects on one of those long ones, it's like that could just be a bonus. So knowing you're getting basically a 100-yard running back with a good shot at a touchdown is pretty phenomenal, and it gives you a high floor for fantasy quarterbacks, even in a tough matchup, because I didn't think that he'd go into Seattle and just straight up throw the ball all over Seattle in Seattle. But 116 yards and a touchdown on the ground. I mean, he's stealing production from the running backs.
Yeah, and the only other thing I'll say is that I do think that Hollywood Brown makes a pretty big difference in this offense. And when he's absent, I think it just doesn't open things up as much for Jackson as it otherwise would. So whenever he gets healthy, I think that's really going to help. But I agree, with the injury to Mahomes, I'm having a hard time, seeing whether or not I'm going to keep him from not being the number 1 quarterback for me. Because, again, the floor with the running is just so incredibly high that it's really, really difficult sort of to kind of find anybody else who is quite that safe in the game. On the other side of the ball, I mean, the first kind of not fantastic game here for Russell Wilson, 241 yards passing, plus a touchdown. He does throw a pick. He runs for 27 yards. Chris Carson largely bottled up. It's a tough matchup against the Ravens, 21 for 65 on the ground. He does catch 3 passes, only 9 yards. We mentioned Tyler Lockett, who finishes with 7 targets, 5 catches for 61 yards and a touchdown. I mean, is this just a tough matchup here and there's nothing really to take away, or anything from the Seahawks side of the ball?
Tyler Lockett overcame being shadowed by Marlon Humphrey, and that's something that a lot of wide receivers recently have struggled with. So to see Lockett do well, it's really a good sign for his success moving forward. Knowing that DK Metcalf is, I don't want to say that he's capped in what he's able to do, but he kind of is. Like we knew him coming into the league, he was going to be somewhat hard to rely on out of the gate. He didn't run a full route tree, and that's going to hurt, right? He's getting a lot of his production from down the field, which is kind of where Tyler Lockett's been getting his. So it's just it's a difficult wide receiver core to project every single week. And now knowing that we don't have Will Dissly there, it's like we wanted to see who's going to get targeted in the red zone. So I'm going to go back and look at this game and watch the red zone targets to see who kind of was favored in that area of the field. But Tyler Lockett, after a game like this, I think you have a leg to stand on saying that you have him as number 9 wide receiver for the rest of the season, and probably better than me having him at wide receiver 15, just because it's like, even when Russell Wilson has a bad game like he did here, Tyler Lockett he produces.
Hooray! Dan wins. The one thing that I will say is when you go back and watch this game, please enjoy when DK Metcalf legitimately just decides that he's going to kind of like drop a ball after he has it and it's running, and he just sort of lets it go, and then the Ravens return it for a touchdown. So that's not going to endear him to anybody in Seattle, but whatever. Anyway, let's move to our last game tags, with which I'm sure you are very familiar. The Saints 36, the Bears 25. It was not close to that score when we started recording, but the Bears got a little garbage time in going in. Teddy Bridgewater continues to do pretty well in the tough matchup, 281 yards passing and 2 touchdowns, most of that to Michael Thomas, who just does his usual 12 targets, 9 catches, 131 yards. Alvin Kamara out for this game. Latavius Murray does not miss a beat. 27 carries, 119 yards, plus 2 touchdowns. Plus he catches 5 passes for 31 yards. Anything you want to say here about the Saints before we get into your Bears?
I'm going to go out on a lim here, and I'm going to say that the Bears are no longer a matchup you have to avoid. Coming off the bye, at home, looked terrible. Without Akeem Hicks up the middle of the field, I had talked about this on the podcast this week, saying Latavius Murray would have been a must start if Alvin Kamara was out, and obviously he was out. I didn't think that Latavius Murray would wind up with 119 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground, but it kind of picks up where they left off in London, where it's like Akeem Hicks got hurt early in that game, and then Josh Jacobs ran all over them. And we saw it again here. This was more of a grinded out game by Latavius Murray. They continued to stick with the run, which was smart, but Michael Thomas continually gets open against the Bears defense. Kyle Fuller and Prince Amukamara are not very good in coverage if you do not get pressure right away. And they were allowing him to get deep into his routes. They weren't getting pressure on Teddy Bridgewater very often. They sacked him one time this game. It was good to see Bridgewater. I'm going to say this, though, in regards to what he had been doing. Like, he has the shortest average depth of target in football, but he took a few shots down the field in this game, and it really paid off. Like, Ted Ginn caught a 45-yard pass. It should have been a touchdown, but a little bit underthrown, whatever. But he completed a few passes down the field to Michael Thomas. So, yeah, I mean, there was positives in this game for Teddy Bridgewater, despite it being a perceived tough matchup, even though the Bears just don't look like the same team.
Yeah, well, Bridgewater's time is coming to an end pretty shortly once Breeze gets back. But all right, Tags, let's finish it up on the low note here. We've got your Bears. Mitch Trubisky winds up with, 251 yards passing and 2 touchdowns, most of it in garbage time. Allen Robinson, the real bright spot, 16 targets, 10 catches, 87 yards, and a score. There is no ground game in this game whatsoever. I mean, they were behind, for a lot of it, but not all of it. Tariq Cohen, 3 carries for 10 yards. Dave Montgomery, 2 carries, 6 yards. He loses a fumble. Just what do you want to say about your Bears, Tags?
Oh,
I need to clip that, by the way, and play that every podcast. Go ahead.
I don't even know where to start. Like, I mean, yeah, they had, just minimal carries. They had 6 carries as a team, like with the running back / wide receiver with Cordarrelle Patterson. Well, if you want to throw Anthony Miller, you could say 7. But either way, going back to the Oakland game, 15 carries. It's Matt Nagy getting too cute with the play calling at times, doing things with Trubisky. Mitch Trubisky looks terrible. And I know the final stat line people will see, 251 yards, 2 touchdowns. The 2 touchdowns came in garbage time. And, this is like a thing between my friends and I. We have like this group text message, and a lot of people were ragging on him at the beginning of the year. And I said, last year he started out slow. I'm not going to make a judgment based on a couple games. Because he did get better as the year went on, and all I wanted to see was progress. But that progress is halted. It's gone in reverse. And Bobby actually, him and I were actually texting before we started the podcast tonight, and he said it reminds him of Mariota, where it's like Marcus Mariota, he got better in his second year, and things looked like they were going in the right path. He may not have been perfect, but it all of a sudden halted, and Trubisky looks terrible. Like the reads that he's making, he's waiting until wide receivers are like wide open, and it's like against the zone defense over the middle of the field. That's where he's comfortable, and I don't know if it's halting the play calling ability of Matt Nagy. I don't know, but it's not opening up anything for the run game because defenses don't have to remain honest. And Allen Robinson is clearly the focal point. It's good to see Anthony Miller get 9 targets, but 5 catches for 64 yards against a defense that was without not only without PJ Williams, their starting nickel cornerback, but they also lost Patrick Robinson early in the game. So they were down to their 3rd string slot cornerback. So Anthony Miller should have had a big game. That should have been expected. But this offense just is brutal right now, man. Like you felt like being the number 12 scoring offense in football last year, you thought that there was going to be some value to be had here. Outside of Allen Robinson, there's nothing.
I expected Trubisky to kind of take a step up here, not in this game, this year. There were reports, there were rumors about how he looked right? And it was not positive, but I was kind of just like, well, whatever. It's just, he'll get it together. But yeah, there's nothing progressing at all from last year. Very quickly before we go, Dave Montgomery, give me your thoughts on him in 30 seconds or less.
I dropped him down to around my RB30 range. He's going to have better days than he had today, obviously, but again, until Trubisky starts throwing the ball better, you're not going to get much production out of the run game because defenses do not have to remain honest. But I do want to be clear is that I did not expect much from David Montgomery in this game because the Saints are, in my opinion, the best run defense in the NFL.
I completely agree with that. All right, that's going to do it for today's show. Thanks again to our sponsor, FanDuel, where you can get $20 in FanDuel credits by going to FanDuel.com/FantasyPros, and Pristine Auction, where they have a ton of great items up for auction daily. Just go to PRISTINE auction.com and put in the promo code FantasyPros in the registration field for a free $5. Enjoy the rest of your Week 7 football, everyone. Tags and Bobby will be back to talk you through the waiver wire.